Hey folks, Matt from artoftheimage.com. I was just having a conversation the other day with a neighbor who was shooting some action photos of their kids playing soccer. They were asking me, what tips did I have? Was there anything I could tell them to get better shots? They said they were missing some shots, some of them were blurry, etc., etc. So this got me thinking, great topic for a video. So I've got 5 tips for you on how to get better action photos. Now the first one is fairly simple, but you might not have thought of it, but it's more to do with your camera body. And if you're not looking to upgrade, this may not be something you have much control over, but what you can do is look at your settings and see how fast your camera can go. What we're talking about here is frame rate. So you want to set your camera to its highest shooting rate, so it can shoot as many frames per second as it's capable of, and you also want to make sure that you have it set to that higher rate, because some of the cameras you can set it down to like single shot, to slow, and then to high as far as burst rates are concerned. So the faster it can shoot and the faster frame rates it's capable of, the more likely you are in a sequence of shots to get one that you like on a moving subject. When you're choosing a camera, this is why you might want to spend a little money. If a lot of your stuff is going to be action stuff, you want to make sure that you have a camera that's capable of that. If you're looking at a APS-C or a crop sensor body, something like the Nikon D7200 is quite good. That camera was actually upgraded from the previous version, the 7100, with a deeper buffer to allow exactly that, a faster speed of shooting. We also have the D7500, which is quite good, and the D500, Nikon's crop sensor flagship. If you really are into shooting fast-moving subjects and money isn't an object, or you're professional, you might want to look at something like the Nikon D5, which has an incredibly fast frame rate, or even the new D850. The D750 has a decent frame rate as well, and even the 610 as a higher level camera isn't a slouch in that area. On the Canon side, the 80D is a very capable camera. And then you can step up higher into the 7D Mark II and soon to be expected 7D Mark III, and then you go higher and higher. We're into faster frame rates on cameras like the top flagship, the Canon 1DX Mark II, which is a reason that, again, if you're a pro or money's not a consideration, you would want to consider that camera for its very fast ability to shoot, its very fast frame rate. Second point goes hand in hand with the speed of the camera, the capability of the camera, and how fast it can shoot, and that is to choose fast memory cards. Fast memory cards will let you, especially if you don't have the money for a higher end camera, sometimes a little bit of extra money spent on a memory card will let your lower end camera shoot faster because it will clear the buffer faster. So if you've got a very fast memory card, the camera can take what it has stored in memory as it's shooting and move it off to the card very quickly, allowing you to keep shooting. Whereas if you had had a slower memory card, it would have blocked things up or locked up, or you would have had to wait until the buffer finished clearing to the memory card. And that I've seen that happen with the slower memory cards. Definitely advantage of a faster memory card. It allows you to get the most out of what your camera is capable of. Top-end cameras, not as big a concern, at least for shooting photos, because they have a lot more buffer and they have a bigger buffer depth, if you will, in the sense that they're able to store it in camera before they start locking up. But again, a faster card is going to allow that information, those files, to push off to the memory card, to write to the memory card much faster. Third up is the lens. Your choice of lens is going to make a big difference in action photography. We're getting into more expensive area here because we're talking about faster lenses, and typically faster lenses are more expensive. Typically you want a faster lens, and it tends to be a longer lens, especially for action shots, because you are not usually right up on your subject. You'll see most people shooting action stuff with longer lenses. In other words, a 70-200 f2.8, so a constant aperture f2.8. Not only does the lens have a fast aperture for zoom, f2.8, it's going to allow more light in, it's going to allow it to focus faster, but it's also, being a longer lens, they just tend to focus a little faster than some of the wider angle lenses and some of the primes that, even some of the really fast primes, can hunt a bit, and I think that's by nature of them getting extremely fast. For instance, I know for a long time the Canon 50mm f1.2L was known to not be a very fast focusing lens. It tended to be a little slower on focus. Beautiful lens, very, very fast lens, but not a great action photography lens. It's typically not what you would use it for, so it wasn't a problem. But you want a longer, faster lens. When I say faster lens, we're not talking into the 1.8 or anything like that. For instance, a 300 f4 would be a very good sports lens. Most people would have or would use in their bag very regularly a 70 to 200 f2.8, whether that's the Canon IS, I think we're on version 2, it's an L lens, or the Nikon, and that I believe is at version 2 as well at the moment, the 70 to 200 f2.8 AFS VR2, I think is, I believe, the current one. I'll put links below to both of those. You can check them out, as I will for anything we've mentioned in these tips. Next up is your focus mode. This ties into the faster focusing lens and the faster lens for light gathering ability, which allows the camera to focus faster. But your focus mode is going to impact on a moving subject. In other words, for Nikon, you probably want to have it set to AFC, which is autofocus continuous. So it's going to keep tracking and continually keep focusing on that moving subject. So when you combine that with a high burst rate, so you're shooting at a high frame rate as well as tracking that subject. And what you're hoping there is with good technique and a good camera and a good autofocus system that, one or more of those shots in a sequence is going to be the golden shot for you. For Canon, that is, I believe, servo mode, if memory serves. So that is, no pun intended there, but servo mode. Nikon would call it AFC for continuous, and I believe Canon is servo mode. So you want to set your camera to that so that it's continuously focusing while you're shooting those high frame rates and trying to capture your moving subject. And my last tip has to do more with you, specifically where you are located. Pick your vantage point ahead of time. Make sure, if you're, especially in a sporting situation, it's not always easy to move about during a game or during the action. So if you've already thought out where you're going to be shooting from, knowing who you're going to want to be shooting, what shots you want, then you're going to pick your vantage point, your shooting point ahead of time, and it will accommodate that. Sometimes, or I shouldn't say sometimes, but the last thing you want to do is be stuck in a position where you don't want to be and missing shots because you didn't think it out ahead of time or perhaps scope out the area ahead of time. If you're shooting birds or any other fast-moving subjects besides, say, sports, this can still be applicable because you want to pick where you're going to be shooting from if you're expecting wildlife to be moving in a certain direction or coming from a certain direction to another direction. So always good to have given some thought to where you're shooting from, where you should be located in relation to your subject, also in relation to your lighting. So just make sure that you give some thought ahead of time to that, where you're shooting from. So that's 5 tips for better action photos. If you've got another one that I've missed or one you'd like to add, please feel free to leave it in the comments below. Always happy to hear from you guys. Maybe we can beef it up to 10 tips. Those were the 5 I came up with when I was thinking on it, but certainly there may be a couple I've missed. And again, just leave them in the comments below. Would appreciate that, and looking forward to hearing from you guys and your feedback, especially those of you that are avid sports shooters or action photography shooters like wildlife or other things with fast-moving subjects. Next up, we've got some great commentary, some great feedback in on the video I did regarding Nikon and misogyny. Were they being prejudiced against women with their selection of 32 male photographers for their Nikon D850 ad campaign? We've got some very interesting feedback from you folks. We've got Boston Hooligan 08, social justice warrior infiltrating the photography world. Stop the madness. So I guess Boston Hooligan is thinking that I'm inferring that he's calling me a social justice warrior. I typically am not, that's not what I'm talking about on this channel, but in this situation, perhaps so, because I do see that as, I don't think that was appropriate. But hey, so be it. I'm sure there's others that may feel that way as well. Mark Marion writes in a comment on the video. We, brackets Americans, live in a country where an Army Ranger veteran just got scolded by his coach and teammates for standing during the national anthem. Do you really think our PC culture is to be taken seriously? The Nikon, even you are referring to, was Nikon Asia regional event. How many big-name Asian photographers are there? Well, my feedback to that would be that I don't think this was necessarily all Asian photographers, and they wouldn't have to be big name. I bet you there's still some decent female Asian photographers. And why not find a female, if you can't find one over there, I'm sure you could find a female Asian photographer over in North America. I'd be willing to bet money on that. So I just think it was not a astute move on Nikon's part. But hey, I like to hear your feedback, and obviously we have people that think it is too PC to be calling Nikon out on this. John Harris says, I know loads of women photographers of all age groups, and they all use their mobile phones. Perhaps Nikon know more about customers than we think. Just a thought. So I don't know if that was tongue-in-cheek or not. I know lots of men photographers of all age groups that use their mobile phones. I think he's kind of joking here. At least I would tend to hope so and think that isn't a slight towards women. Gary Grimes writes in and says, the real question here is, should Nikon be judged on the basis of another continent's definition of political correctness, or should we just respect Japanese culture for what it is? I doubt if any of the people who are getting their panties in a wad have ever been to Japan. Good question, but we are living in a global society, a global marketplace, and I don't think it's unfair to judge other cultures on their disrespect of half of their population. And I feel that way about not just Japan, but any culture who puts women down, who puts them as second-class citizens, who has laws designed to oppress them. I don't support that, and I don't endorse or think that's okay of a culture. I think that's something in a culture that needs to change. I don't know if you guys disagree with me. Feel free to leave a comment, but let's keep it civil here. Let's see here. And Gary also added, very typical of Japanese culture. I'm sure no one in Asia even noticed it. I think that probably a fair comment, but I'm not sure that that would be the case among a younger generation, because I think a lot of these old school ways of thinking are not okay with the younger generation. Just a thought. Dunny Monster, they picked 32 of the best photographers. The fact that they were all men is purely incidental. Pick 32 of the best basketball players, and you'll likely have a list where all 32 are over 6 feet tall. Does that make basketball heightist? LOL? Okay, good point, except I'm not sure there's a lot of strength in your comparison, because basketball players are, to my knowledge, pretty much all men in pro basketball. There are a lot of pro female photographers out there. There are some good ones. In fact, we have John Spur up next, who says there were several pro female photographers at the featured video event. For instance, Snap Chick AZ and Tony Northrup's wife Chelsea were there, and they even had a hand in video preparation on their sites using the 850. So I think that it is all about nothing. They like the camera. I don't know if Snap Chick is a professional photographer or if she just has a YouTube channel. Tony Northrup's wife, Chelsea, I don't think she's a professional photographer. She's a female photographer. I don't think she shoots for a living, so I don't think she's a pro. But case in point, 2 female photographers. Vegan Marine says, can anyone name 10 or even 5 great female photographers? I sure can't. We don't need gender quotas in photography. Even if Nikon were to put out a handful of females on the list, Nikon would have still caught crap because it was not 50-50. It's never enough. So, interesting, but I think you should have at least had a showing. Now, difference in opinion here, but I think a few females would have at least offset the fact that there are a glaring none. Vicky Martinoff writes in I think response to Vegan Marine here, and he said, can you name anyone? Can anyone name 10 or even 5 great female photographers? Vicky says Jane Brown, Margaret Cameron, Lee Miller, Dorothy Lange, Diane Arbus, Annie Leibovitz, Sally Mann, Ruth Bernhard, Lenny Riefenstahl, apologize if I messed up that name, Eve Arnold, for starters. They aren't just great photographers, they are among the greatest ever. I could point out that you could make a similar list of YouTubers and Nikon themselves having ambassadors like their very own Dixie Dixon. So they really have no excuse at all. Just saying. So Vicky had a very good rebuttal comeback to that about not being able to name 10 photographers. She just did, and makes some great points there, which I right in line with my thoughts on it. Is you could have put some of these people in, or even one of your own Nikon ambassadors as a showing. Rakitha Perez, I think Nikon's management is probably unaware or doesn't like to change their views. This hesitation to changing markets and the environment has probably led to Nikon's current downward trend. Brackets, and even now they continue to deny their failures and trash talk others. This will continue as their management thinks and acts this way. And I think this is not just Nikon. I've seen this, I think, on Canon's part, and I think there is some old school thinking and old school management in Japan that doesn't, lend themselves to modern ways of thinking and current ways of thinking in the global economy. I mean, if you want to participate in the global economy, as I said before, then you kind of need to be aware of this. And the thing is, more and more and more women are shooting pro these days, and in subsegments, there's probably more women than men, specifically like boudoir or children's photography. I think it's dominated more by female pro photographers. Why do you want to alienate your marketplace? If you want to leave thoughts aside and everything else of what you think, just look at it from a purely business standpoint. From a purely business standpoint, why alienate such a large market group? Doesn't make sense. Vicky has another comment here. I think this was an earlier one that was on the post. Well, it's another example of how bad the Nikon management is. Why can't they sell kit and are making the biggest losses in the industry? The customer is king and half of them are female. So it's kind of going towards what I just mentioned. If you don't address that market, you are failing to tap into half the potential sales. Company like Olympus and Panasonic and Leica, Fuji too, put a lot of effort into addressing the female market. Why should this matter? Well, what a wife and daughter wants matters because they will share lenses and stuff with their husband and will have an input into what he buys. I lost it with Nikon when they brought out the DF. I realized Nikon would never make another camera I wanted, so I spent the money on a Leica X113, which is a gorgeous design for a woman. I've since replaced my Nikon kit with Panasonic to match the Leica. Nikon sucks basically, and this woman has dumped them after 30 years. So some good points from Vicky and her own personal opinion, and she's left Nikon. So just some interesting feedback here. Some of you thinking that this type of thinking is too PC. A lot of you thinking we shouldn't even be considering that, or that perhaps it's because of the area. And then we do have people, especially some examples of some women who were, offended, and this was a reason in Vicky's case why she left Nikon. So some great feedback, some great commentary. Thanks, guys. I always like to flush these things out and see what other people are thinking. So thanks very much. And again, if you have further comments to add, feel free to leave it in the comments below. And our question of the day comes in. I believe this was a comment on a video, but this is from Stephen writing in. Oh no, sorry, Stefan. I think I'm reading that wrong. Maybe because I didn't have my glasses on. Hey Matt, I am a beginner photographer and I'm interested in purchasing my first DSLR for live music photography. Video isn't really my thing, but the option would be nice to have. What body lenses would you recommend? Love the content, by the way. Keep up the good work, Stefan. Well, thank you very much for your question, Stefan. My answer to that would be probably, since it's your first, I'm assuming we're on a budget here, I would look at the Nikon D7500 basically for bang for buck, because it's a great price point. It gets you kind of everything in the D500, or a lot of the goodness of the D500 at a lower price. Now, if you're not price sensitive, the D500 would be a good way to go. And if you're totally not price sensitive, then by all means go for something like the Nikon D5 or the Canon 1DX Mark II. I'm assuming because it's your first DSLR, we have some price sensitivity. So the D7500 would be my number one recommendation, because it's a very capable camera for the autofocus system, which you're going to need for live music. So you're going to want some decent autofocus ability. Very capable sensor for low light ability. So the autofocus is very good. The low light ability of the sensor is very good. It's the D500 sensor. So one of the best, if not the best, currently on the market for a crop sensor in a camera. So the D7500 has both of those things, but it also has 4K video. So we've got current standards of video there. So if you do want to shoot video, you can either extract stills at the 4K level, which is very nice, or you could just have full 4K video. So that would be my number one recommendation. Number two would probably be an A6300 or an A6500 from Sony. Both of them have very good sensors in them. Both of them have very good autofocus systems. And again, both of them can shoot 4K video. The other option would be if you did say video is not really important, but you'd like to do it, well, the 80D and the 7070, one of those two, depending on which camera you prefer when you get your hands on them. I would probably go 80D, but the 7070 is a very good choice as well. The big negative there is no 4K, but still a pretty decent sensor. Not as good as the 7500s or the Sonys, but if you are leaning towards Canon, one of those two, or perhaps even a used 7D Mark II or Mark I, depending on your budget. And as far as lenses, I would suggest for music photography some fast primes, an 85 f1.8, either in the Nikon. The 85 f1.8G is a very nice lens. Sony has some. I'll put some links below to these lenses. And also, like for the Nikon, for my number one recommendation would probably be the Sigma 17-50 f2.8 as a great all-around faster zoom, paired with that really good high ISO performance. Really sweet setup there. The Sony, I would probably look at the 18-105 f4. I think f4 with their ISO performance would be decent. And the Canon, I would probably again go with the Sigma 17-50 f2.8. And again, either a 50 f1.8 or a 85 f1.8 fast prime would be my preferences with all of those, so that you can get some good low light ability for the times when you don't have a brightly lit stage or whatnot, or if you want to blow the background out. So that's what I would recommend. What would you guys recommend? Let's help out Stefan. What would be your choices for his situation for live music photography? What first DSLR or first camera? I did throw in obviously the Sonys there, which are MILCs, mirrorless interchangeable lens cameras. I'm gonna leave that in there because I think when people say DSLR these days, a lot of people are just thinking, what are your options? And Sony doesn't really make DSLRs; they make DSLTs and MILCs. So. Let us know in the comments below which way you would go there and why. Flush it out a little for Stefan. Thanks for your question. And stay tuned. We'll be back soon here at artoftheimage.com.